deal?
Well, to some extent, it will be difficult for a lot of people. Of course, bills are already fairly high, but we need to dive into what we expect that £2,500 figure to be, because there is, of course, that £400 payment that families will be receiving this October as well as part of the previous energy alleviation package. So that would bring it down to closer to £2,000, still more than, for example, people were paying last year, but not an increase on the last round of the energy price cap assessment. So staying in terms of what families have already been paying, really. That's what we're expecting to come from this announcement. But yes, still, energy costs are high. This isn't going to be easy for a lot of families. But on the other hand, there are economists who are saying that this is potentially not the best signal to send to the market in terms of just freezing a price. A price control breaks the price mechanism system, the system that normally tells that players in the market that they need to use less energy, or indeed encourages producers in the market to produce more energy. So if that signal has been broken by this policy, it's hard to see how this will bring about a market mechanism end to this crisis that the world is seeing, because there does need to be less energy used.
Right.
The EU
so in other
yesterday
words,
proposed energy rationing across Europe.
Because otherwise you risk blackouts, right? You have this price freeze, but consumption doesn't go down. And what's the net result? Potentially, we could see the lights being switched off.
That's the real risk. So we are expecting to see a lot on the supply side of the equation today as well. But the question is, how quickly can supply come on stream? Not particularly quickly, according to any reputable analyst, not in time for this winter. So there will need to be a way in which people use less energy. And the price mechanism was one of those ways that encouraged people to save energy, to use less. That seems to be broken here. And one of the problems with a crude energy price cap is that, for example, millionaires who want to heat their swimming pools are going to get that same cap that struggling families on the lower end of the income scale.
But I believe the reason it was chosen, this more crude approach, is because, quite frankly, a means-tested approach is just much more fiddly, much more time-consuming, and this was so urgent it needed to be dealt with very quickly. But I think you're right, and it's something that I know you've talked about on your social media platform as well, is that this isn't just about what can the government do in this crisis. There has to be a shift in emphasis to what the consumer and the citizen can do. And I believe there's going to be a move towards a return of sort of public service broadcasting in terms of these public what am I trying to say? The little videos the government put out to encourage people, turn your lights off, turn off your TV at night, try and save energy yourself.
Almost voluntary measures to try and deal with this issue, and also public information in terms of what are the things that use the most energy, because sometimes it really isn't what you think it is. There have been reports recently of, for example, elderly people not using their stair lifts and only staying on one floor in the house. Well, it turns out that a stair lift really does not use much energy at all, whereas some things that you wouldn't expect to use a lot of energy really do. So greater public information is a good role for the government to deliver, rather than the more crude option of literally telling people they can or cannot do something. Unfortunately, that's what the EU proposed just yesterday, rationing in terms of what energy people may use. Now, that might not be taken up by the institutions, the other institutions of the EU or the individual countries, but that's what the Commission said yesterday. It really is very, very difficult for every country that is experiencing these incredible price hikes.
Here in the UK, though, what the Prime Minister is proposing is expected to cost north of 100 billion a year. Now, that is more than we spent on furlough, and as we said, that is annual. That is until this package ends. Can we afford it?
That is the big question. It's almost as if how long is a piece of string, because frankly, we don't know how high these energy costs are going to go. And so it's hard to put an absolute number on it. Almost certainly more than £100 billion, because you need to factor in, of course, the help that will go to businesses as well that hitherto have not had the sort of price cap protections that the consumers have done. And so we're seeing potentially a lot of businesses thinking about going out of business unless there's help there too. But also, we don't know how tight Putin is going to clench his hand on those taps and keeping that gas and oil not flowing through in the usual way. Prices could go up further if there isn't a big spurt in supply, and so it could get even more expensive. At this stage, it's just impossible to know whether this is affordable or not.
And how does the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, square the circle of having campaigned on a cutting taxes ticket and then coming into office and spending really, really big? How do you do both?
It's interesting to note in Prime Minister's questions yesterday, almost every question that was asked of the new Prime Minister, she brought it back to one fundamental point: economic growth. And the point is, if you do grow your economy, if the size of the pie is bigger, you can keep the tax proportion the same and generate more revenue. This is the gamble that Liz Truss is taking, that her supply-side reforms and indeed some of her tax cuts will be able to grow the economy so that there's a larger economy, so that more can be spent on things without having to raise taxes. It sounds almost counterintuitive that sometimes tax cuts, but certainly supply-side reform as well, can actually grow the amount of money that the Exchequer takes in. But that's the gamble the government's taking.
It's a huge gamble, and I suppose at the end of the day, if that doesn't work, it's a loss in a general election.
Well, potentially. This is something that this premiership is really staking itself on, not on how things are presented. That's really out of the window. Liz Truss has said many times during the leadership campaign that she's not the flashiest, not the slickest politician, but her premiership is one that's predicated on policy. And so we will see such a policy focus. We did see it yesterday as well. And to be fair to Liz Truss, she is someone who does do detail. She used to run a policy think tank before she got into Parliament, and she has been known to be someone who does pore over the intricacies of policy. This will be a premiership, more so than any perhaps since Margaret Thatcher, that will live or die based on how the policy turns out rather than presentation.